Buy a cow and take an Apache woman for free. Until a cowboy appeared, the sun was bright and harsh over the dusty streets of the small frontier town. The wind blew sand across the wooden sidewalks, and the smell of hay, cattle, and smoke mixed in the air. Life here was hard, and people learned quickly that the world outside the town was even harder. Most of the townsfolk spent their days trying to survive, taking care of their livestock, fixing fences, or trading goods at the small general store that stood at the heart of the town. But that day, something unusual had caught everyone's attention. A large, hand-painted sign hung from the wooden front of the general store, swinging gently in the wind. The words on it were shocking, almost unbelievable. Buy a cow and take an Apache woman for free. People stopped in their tracks, staring at the sign as though it were some kind of cruel joke. Some laughed nervously, unsure if they should take it seriously, while others frowned in anger or disgust. Mothers pulled their children close, and men whispered to each other in disbelief. The words on the sign were more than just outrageous. They were offensive, dangerous, and completely wrong. Inside the store, the trader who had put up the sign leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. He was a man known for his bold and often questionable deals, someone who had a reputation for pushing the limits of what was acceptable. Today, however, he had crossed a line that even many of the rough frontier men could see. He had no idea how much trouble his sign would cause, nor how it would change the day in ways he could not imagine. Among the crowd gathering outside, there was an uneasy mix of curiosity and outrage. Some people wanted to see if anyone would actually respond to the offer. Others shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about how lawless the town had become. The whisper of gossip spread like wildfire, reaching the corners of the town, and even people who had not seen the sign came running to catch a glimpse. "Have you heard about it?" they asked each other. "Can it really be true?" Not far from the main street, a young Apache woman named Nakamis watched the scene unfold. She had dark, sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. Her long hair was braided neatly, and she moved with a quiet confidence that suggested she was someone used to paying attention and thinking ahead. Nakamis was no stranger to danger or unfair treatment, but seeing the words on that sign made her blood boil. She understood immediately that the trader's plan was not a joke. To him, she and other women like her were nothing more than objects for sale, and he expected people to treat this idea as normal. Nakamis felt a mix of fear, anger, and determination. Fear because she knew how easily a clever or cruel person could exploit others in this lawless place. Anger because it was an insult not only to her but to all her people. And determination because she refused to let someone else decide her fate. She had grown up learning how to survive in a world that often overlooked the rights of her people, and she knew she could not rely on anyone else to protect her. Nakamis had to rely on her own intelligence, her instincts, and her courage to make it through this challenge. As the townspeople continued to gather, the air filled with tension. People were talking louder now, voices rising with a mix of shock and curiosity. Some men were discussing whether it would be legal to accept such an offer. Others spoke of the trader's boldness, criticizing him for daring to put such words in public. A few, less concerned with morals, even whispered about the potential to take advantage of the offer, though their words were cautious, almost fearful. Meanwhile, inside the store, the trader rubbed his hands together, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting. He believed he was clever, thinking no one could challenge him. To him, the sign was a way to draw in buyers, to create excitement, and to see how far people would go for a bargain. He had always lived on the edge, pushing the rules of decency, and today seemed no different. Yet he had no idea that this act of arrogance was about to backfire in ways he could never predict. Nakamis, watching from a safe distance, realized that she could not simply wait for someone else to solve the problem. She began considering her options carefully. Running away might protect her for the moment, but the traitor would likely try to find her again. Ignoring the sign would leave the town and other women vulnerable to his schemes. She had to think of a way to confront the situation, to protect herself, and perhaps even turn the event to her advantage. She moved quietly through the edges of the gathering crowd, blending in while keeping her eyes on the traitor. She noticed that the townsfolk were not all united in their reactions. Some were horrified, some curious, some eager to see what would happen next. Nakamis understood that the people's uncertainty could be both a danger and an opportunity. If she timed her actions correctly, she could use their attention and confusion to her advantage. The gossip in the town grew louder with each passing hour. Travelers passing through would stop to see the strange scene, asking questions about the sign and the traitor. Stories began to form in the mouths of the townspeople, exaggerating and twisting details. Some claimed that the traitor had always been cruel, using women and children to increase his profits. Others argued that the sign was meant as a joke, though even they could not explain why such a joke was allowed to stand publicly. Children peered from behind their parents, curious but frightened. Mothers whispered warnings to them, teaching lessons about fairness, respect, and danger. Men who usually spent their days tending to cattle or repairing fences were now drawn to the town center, some out of anger, others out of fascination. Nakamis noticed them all, understanding that this crowd, while chaotic, could be important if she needed support later. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the town seemed to hold its breath. Everyone was waiting for someone to respond, someone bold enough to challenge the traitor or foolish enough to take him seriously. Nakamis felt a growing determination. She would not let herself be treated as property. She would not let fear control her. She would not let the traitor's cruelty go unchallenged. The decision she was about to make would not only affect her but the entire town, and perhaps the way people thought about fairness and justice in this wild place. Finally, as the townspeople murmured and the traitor smiled confidently inside his store, Nakamis made her choice. She would not run. She would not hide. She would face the situation head-on, using her intelligence, courage, and resourcefulness. She began moving toward the store, blending with the crowd, careful to keep her plan hidden from the traitor. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear. Every step brought her closer to confronting the injustice, and she could feel the eyes of the town upon her, even if they did not fully understand what was happening. The traitor, unaware of the determination building against him, continued to bask in the attention, confident that no one would dare challenge his outrageous claim. The moment was tense, filled with anticipation. Everyone in the town seemed to sense that something important was about to happen, though none of them could predict exactly what. Nakamis knew that this was a turning point, not just for her but for the town itself. She understood that courage and intelligence, when combined, could change outcomes that seemed hopeless or impossible. As she moved closer, the sun glinting off the wooden planks of the street, the town held its collective breath. The wind stirred the dust, carrying whispers of curiosity, fear, and hope. Nakamis's eyes never left the traitor, and her mind raced with strategies, plans, and ideas. She knew that the next few moments would define her path forward, and she was ready to face whatever came next. By the time she reached the edge of the crowd, the townsfolk were whispering excitedly, sensing that a confrontation might be coming. The traitor, still confident, had no idea that his arrogance was about to meet someone who would not bow to fear, greed, or cruelty. Nakamis, quiet but determined, was ready to take the first step in changing the story of the town forever. And so, under the hot, unyielding sun, with the wind carrying dust and whispers alike, the stage was set. The traitor had posted his outrageous sign. The townsfolk had gathered in disbelief and curiosity. And Nakamis, brave and clever, prepared to take her first steps toward justice, freedom, and proving that no one had the right to decide the fate of another human being. The tension was electric, the stakes were high, and the story was only beginning. The day after the shocking sign appeared, the small frontier town was buzzing with tension and speculation. People spoke in hurried whispers, walking quickly from one end of the dusty street to the other, glancing over their shoulders as though danger could appear at any moment. Every passerby, every traveler stopping at the town, seemed drawn to the strange and outrageous message displayed on the general store. Some people expressed anger openly, while others debated quietly among themselves. No one could ignore the unsettling words. Nakamis had spent the morning carefully observing the town. From a distance, she watched the interactions, listening to the conversations of settlers, cowhands, and traders. She noticed how some men frowned and shook their heads, clearly disturbed by the audacity of the sign. Others, less concerned with morality, whispered jokes or tried to imagine if anyone would actually respond. The mix of fear, curiosity, and moral conflict created an unusual tension that hung in the air like thick dust. She also noticed families huddled together, protecting their children from what they saw as a symbol of the trader's cruelty. Mothers spoke softly but firmly about respect, fairness, and the danger of greed. Fathers muttered under their breath, some angry at the trader, others worried about how such behavior could affect the town's reputation. Even the children, young and innocent, felt the unease around them. They didn't fully understand the situation, but they could sense that something serious was unfolding. Nakamis knew that hiding would only delay the inevitable. The trader's sign was not a joke. It was an attempt to assert power over people who had little protection in this lawless town. She had grown up learning the harsh lessons of life in the frontier. Danger often came from those who acted without conscience, and survival depended on intelligence, awareness, and courage. Standing by and doing nothing was never an option for her. As the day progressed, rumors began to take on a life of their own. Travelers who stopped in town repeated what they had heard to anyone willing to listen, often exaggerating details. Some claimed that the trader had made similar offers in other towns, treating human beings like objects to increase his profits. Others argued that the sign was meant to be a joke, though few could explain why such a cruel joke would be displayed so publicly. The story spread quickly, feeding both fear and fascination. Nakamis saw that the townspeople were divided. A few brave men and women openly criticized the trader, confronting him in small groups and demanding he take the sign down. Others, intimidated by his reputation or afraid of causing trouble, stayed silent. Some simply watched from a distance, uncertain of what to do. The town itself seemed caught between outrage and hesitation, unsure of how to respond to the challenge before them. In the shadows, Nakamis began to plan. She knew she could not rely entirely on the townspeople to protect her or to stop the trader. The law was weak in this frontier town, and many people were too afraid to act. She needed a strategy that combined patience, observation, and careful action. She thought about what she had learned from her family and her people. Knowledge was power, and courage was more effective when paired with careful planning. She spent hours moving quietly along the edges of the crowd, listening to conversations and watching interactions. She noticed the trader watching her from inside the store, confident that she was just another frightened woman who would eventually submit to his control. That confidence made him careless, and Nakamis recognized an opportunity. She began thinking about ways to use his arrogance against him. While she observed, a few townspeople approached her discreetly. They were neighbors and friends, people who had noticed her intelligence and courage. They warned her about the danger of confronting the trader directly, telling her to be careful and not to act rashly. Nakamis thanked them but knew that caution alone would not be enough. She had to assert her own will, find allies if possible, and expose the trader's wrongdoing. As the sun climbed higher, the town's atmosphere grew more tense. The general store became a focal point for discussion and speculation. People stood in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about the trader, the sign, and the morality of the situation. Children peeked from behind carts and wagons, fascinated and frightened by the commotion. Traders passing through the town slowed their wagons to observe, curious about the spectacle. Even those who had not seen the sign firsthand had heard enough stories to understand that something serious was happening. Nakamis realized that the crowd could serve as both a challenge and an advantage. While many people were afraid or indecisive, the collective attention of the town could provide cover and support if she timed her actions correctly. She began to formulate a plan that relied on careful observation, timing, and courage. She would need to confront the traitor directly, but she would also need to be smart, using the town's attention to her advantage. She spent the afternoon practicing her approach, thinking through every possible reaction from the traitor and the townspeople. She imagined scenarios in which he tried to intimidate her, others where he attempted to manipulate the crowd, and even possibilities where people might try to intervene on his behalf. Each scenario helped her refine her strategy and build confidence. She knew that preparation and awareness were essential if she was to succeed. As evening approached, the trader grew more confident, believing that his sign had created curiosity without consequences. He did not realize that the longer he waited, the more people were observing him, learning his habits and discussing ways to challenge him. His arrogance blinded him to the growing determination of one young woman who refused to be treated as property. Nakamis also noticed that the townspeople were beginning to show signs of impatience and moral concern. Some had started to openly criticize the trader in small conversations, questioning the fairness and justice of his actions. Others were debating what steps they could take to prevent such cruelty, though many were still unsure how to act. The atmosphere of tension had shifted slightly, from fear to anticipation, as if the town was collectively preparing for an event that could change everything. Night began to fall, and the shadows of the wooden buildings stretched across the street. Nakamis retreated to a quiet corner to rest and reflect. She understood that the next day would be critical. She had to be ready to act, to confront the traitor, and to assert her freedom in a way that would inspire others to stand for what was right. She thought about her family, her people, and the lessons she had learned about courage and survival. These thoughts strengthened her resolve, giving her the clarity and determination she would need. That night, as the town grew quiet and the wind whispered through the streets, Nakamis made a promise to herself. She would not allow fear to dictate her actions. She would not allow cruelty or greed to go unchallenged. She would confront the traitor with intelligence, courage, and dignity. And she would do so in a way that protected her autonomy and set an example for the town. By morning, the town was alive with curiosity once again. People moved about, discussing what might happen and watching the general store with renewed interest. Rumors had grown, the moral tension had intensified, and everyone could sense that something important was about to unfold. Nakamis felt the weight of responsibility, but she also felt the strength that came from planning, preparation, and inner courage. She knew that the coming confrontation would not be easy, but she also understood that it was necessary. As she stepped carefully through the streets, keeping to the edges of the crowd, Nakamis felt the eyes of the townspeople upon her. She could see their curiosity, their unease, and in some cases their admiration. Though she did not rely on their support, she recognized that the town's attention could be an advantage if used wisely. Each step brought her closer to the store, closer to confronting the traitor, and closer to asserting her own freedom in a world that often sought to deny it. The traitor, inside his store, remained unaware of the careful planning and determination of the young woman outside. He believed that his sign had caused enough spectacle to entertain the town, but he had underestimated the intelligence, courage, and resourcefulness of the person he thought he could control. Nakamis's presence, quiet but deliberate, signaled that the balance of power was about to shift. By midday, the tension in the town was nearly unbearable. Conversation stopped when she approached, and even the most casual observers sensed that something important was about to happen. Nakamis felt a mix of anticipation and focus. She knew the traitor would likely react with surprise or anger, but she also knew that careful preparation and calm determination could turn the situation in her favor. With every passing moment, the stage was set. The townspeople, once unsure and hesitant, now looked on with a mix of curiosity and concern. Nakamis's careful observation, preparation, and resolve had positioned her for the confrontation that would determine the course of events. The traitor, oblivious to the forces he had provoked, remained inside, confident in his power. And so the town waited, the dusty streets filled with anticipation and tension. Nakamis, prepared and determined, readied herself to act. The coming events would test courage, intelligence, and morality in a way that no one in the town had expected. And while the sun beat down relentlessly, casting long shadows across the streets, one young woman's resolve would prove that even in the harsh frontier, bravery and cleverness could challenge cruelty, injustice, and greed. The next morning, the town seemed unusually quiet, though. A sense of anticipation lingered in the air. People moved more slowly along the dusty streets, glancing toward the general store as if expecting something to happen at any moment. The sun rose high, casting long shadows on the wooden sidewalks and flickering in the windows of the buildings. Even the cattle in the nearby pens seemed restless, sensing the tension among the townspeople. Nakamis had spent the early hours observing the trader and the crowd. She moved with care, blending in with those walking through town while keeping a watchful eye on the general store. The trader was already outside, arranging goods, polishing his boots, and smiling with the same smug confidence he had shown for the past 2 days. He seemed unaware that the balance of power was slowly shifting, and that the town was no longer entirely on his side. As she waited, a sudden sound broke the morning stillness. The faint rhythm of horse hooves echoed across the wooden streets, growing steadily louder. At first, people ignored it, thinking it was another traveler passing through. But the sound was steady, deliberate, and carried a weight that drew attention. Townsfolk paused in the middle of their chores, heads turning toward the approaching figure. The cowboy rode slowly into town, sitting tall in the saddle, with a wide-brimmed hat shading his face and a calm but powerful presence that seemed to command respect. His horse moved gracefully, though strong and steady, as if it shared the rider's confidence and purpose. Dust trailed behind them in a thin cloud, and the sound of hooves striking the wooden planks of the street seemed to announce the arrival of someone important. The townspeople began whispering among themselves. "Who is that?" one man asked. "I don't recognize him. He looks like someone who doesn't take nonsense from anyone," another replied. There was a sense of curiosity and awe mixed with hope as people sensed that the mysterious rider might change the course of events in the town. Nakamis stopped for a moment, her eyes narrowing. She could feel that this newcomer was different. There was something in his posture, his deliberate movements, and the calm way he scanned the town that suggested he was not an ordinary traveler. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone, with a purpose that was quietly powerful. She felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps this cowboy could be an ally in her struggle to confront the traitor and assert her freedom. The cowboy dismounted smoothly, tying his horse near the edge of the town square. His movements were calm and measured, giving an impression of confidence without arrogance. He adjusted his hat and walked toward the general store, his eyes fixed on the trader. The crowd seemed to part naturally, giving him space as if they instinctively recognized that someone important had arrived. The trader noticed the cowboy immediately and straightened with sudden alertness. His smug smile faltered slightly as he studied the newcomer. He could tell at once that this was no ordinary man who could be ignored or intimidated. There was a quiet authority about the cowboy, a calm confidence that suggested he was not afraid of confrontation or conflict. The trader's arrogance met its first challenge. The cowboy spoke in a calm but firm voice, addressing the trader directly. "I saw your sign," he said, his words deliberate and clear. "Do you really think it's right to treat a human being as property?" The trader blinked, trying to regain his composure. He had expected curiosity, fear, or even admiration, but not a direct challenge from someone who radiated authority. The townspeople held their breath. They had been waiting for a challenge, a moment when someone would finally confront the trader. And now that moment had arrived. There was a quiet tension in the air, as if the town itself recognized that a turning point had come. People watched closely, wondering how the trader would respond and whether the cowboy would succeed in standing up to him. Nakamis watched from the edge of the crowd, studying the cowboy carefully. She could see that he was different from the others who had tried to challenge the trader. His movements were confident but not reckless. His eyes were steady, focused, and alert. She realized that if she aligned her plan with his presence, they could create a situation in which the trader would have little room to act without consequences. The trader attempted to speak, but his words stumbled. It's just a joke," he said, his voice slightly wavering. "It's not meant to be taken seriously. People like you're reading too much into it." The cowboy shook his head slowly. "There's nothing funny about it," he said. "Treating another human being as property is never a joke. You've crossed a line that cannot be ignored." The townspeople began murmuring, some nodding in agreement, others whispering words of encouragement. The energy in the town square shifted. What had started as curiosity and fear now became a collective awareness that injustice was being confronted openly. The trader's confidence wavered further, though he tried to mask it with bluster. Nakamis realized that this was her moment. The presence of the cowboy had given her both courage and a potential ally, even if they had not yet spoken directly. She stepped forward, blending with the crowd, ready to assert her own voice. She knew that courage alone would not be enough. She needed clarity, dignity, and intelligence to confront the traitor effectively. The cowboy's gaze swept across the town, noticing her presence. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Nakamis felt a quiet understanding pass between them. They were both aware of the stakes and the danger, but also of the potential for justice. The cowboy nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her courage and readiness to act. The trader's face reddened with anger. "I don't know what you people are thinking," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "No one can tell me what to do in my own store. That sign is my business. It's my property. And I will do what I want." The cowboy remained calm, his voice steady and unwavering. "Property does not include human lives," he said. "You cannot decide the fate of someone else without their consent." The crowd's tension rose, the murmur of whispers growing louder. People began to step closer to witness the confrontation more clearly. Nakamis, blending in but moving deliberately, felt the energy of the town behind her. She realized that the collective attention of the townspeople could be used strategically, both to support her actions and to limit the trader's ability to react violently. The cowboy continued to speak, outlining the injustice of the trader's sign and the moral and legal consequences that could follow if he persisted. His words were firm but fair, designed to appeal not only to the trader's conscience, but also to the townspeople's sense of justice. Slowly, the mood in the town began to shift. People who had been hesitant before now felt emboldened, sensing that this was the moment to stand for what was right. Nakamis took a deep breath and stepped forward more openly. Her voice was clear, steady, and filled with quiet authority. "I will not be treated as property," she said. No one has the right to decide my life, my freedom, or my choices. This town may have allowed injustice to persist in the past, but I will not allow it to happen to me." Her words drew the attention of every person in the town square. The trader's smugness faltered, and a wave of murmurs spread among the crowd. The cowboy glanced at her and nodded slightly, silently recognizing her bravery and intelligence. He continued speaking, now addressing both the trader and the townspeople. "Courage is not just about facing danger," he said. "It's also about standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult. This is a test for all of us, whether we allow injustice or whether we confront it together." The trader's face twisted with frustration. He tried to speak again, but the confidence in his voice was gone. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his arrogance had underestimated the determination of both the young woman and the cowboy who had appeared seemingly from nowhere. The town was watching. The balance of power had shifted, and the trader had few options left. Nakamis felt a quiet sense of empowerment. The cowboy's presence had changed the dynamic, giving her both moral support and a strategic advantage. She now understood that courage, intelligence, and careful timing could challenge even the most arrogant and cruel individuals. The town, which had seemed paralyzed by fear and indecision, was beginning to come alive with a collective sense of justice. By mid-morning, the confrontation had reached a delicate point. The trader, realizing he was losing control of the situation, attempted one final display of bravado. "This is my business. I can do what I want," he shouted. But his words lacked conviction, and the townspeople's murmurs of disapproval grew louder. The cowboy's calm demeanor and Nakamis's clear assertion of her rights had exposed his weakness. The townspeople, who had spent the last 2 days unsure of how to act, now felt the stirrings of courage. Mothers whispered encouragement to their children, men nodded to each other, and even those who had been passive observers began to see that justice could prevail. The combination of the cowboy's authority and Nakamis's bravery had transformed the energy of the town, making it clear that cruelty would not go unchallenged. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the wooden planks of the streets, but the heat could not dampen the sense of purpose growing among the people. Nakamis, standing with quiet determination, felt a sense of clarity and resolve. She had observed, planned, and now acted with intelligence and courage. The cowboy's arrival had been the catalyst, but she understood that her own actions were essential to confronting injustice. As the confrontation continued, it became increasingly clear that the trader's days of unchecked arrogance were over. His sign, which had caused shock and curiosity, now represented a challenge to his power. The cowboy's presence, combined with Nakamis's assertiveness, had created a situation in which the town would no longer tolerate exploitation or cruelty. The stage was set for the next chapter of the story, where the courage, intelligence, and resourcefulness of one young woman, aided by an unexpected ally, would confront greed and cruelty head-on. The events unfolding in the town square were about to reach a turning point, and the actions taken in the coming hours would shape the future of both Nakamis and the townspeople. The sun climbed higher over the dusty frontier town, shining on the wooden buildings and the dirt-strewn streets. By mid-morning, the town square had transformed into a stage for an extraordinary confrontation. The townspeople had gathered in clusters, their faces tense and alert, their whispers hushed but full of anticipation. The trader, who had spent the last few days basking in attention and curiosity, now felt the weight of scrutiny pressing in on him from every side. The arrival of the cowboy had shifted the balance, and the presence of Nakamis standing tall and unafraid only intensified the pressure. The trader tried to assert himself, stepping forward with a forced confidence, though his hands trembled slightly. "I'm only running my business," he stammered. This is my store. I can put up any sign I want. It's not illegal." His voice echoed across the town square, but it lacked conviction. The townspeople exchanged worried glances, sensing the fragility behind his words. Nakamis, moving slightly closer to the center of the square, spoke with clarity and calm authority. You do not have the right to decide the life of another person. Freedom is not a commodity, and human beings are not objects to be bought or sold. Your sign is wrong and your actions are wrong. You cannot force anyone to be part of this cruel scheme. Her voice was firm but measured, each word carrying weight. The crowd shifted, leaning in, listening more intently than ever. Mothers held their children closer, men straightened their backs, and even those who had been silent until now seemed drawn into the moral gravity of her words. The cowboy stepped forward, his tall figure calm and commanding. "You've misjudged the town," he said, addressing the trader. "You thought everyone would stand by and ignore this injustice. You thought people would be afraid to challenge your cruelty. But you were wrong. Morality, courage, and justice are stronger than greed. Your arrogance has blinded you to what's right." His voice carried a quiet strength that drew the attention of everyone present, even the more skeptical townsfolk. The trader's face flushed red with anger. "I am in charge here. I can do whatever I want." "No one will stop me," he shouted, though his voice cracked slightly under the pressure. The cowboy's gaze remained steady. "Authority does not give you the right to harm others or treat them as property. Power is meaningless when it is built on fear and cruelty. This ends now." The crowd began to murmur in agreement, their voices growing louder as the realization spread that the trader's control over them was not absolute. Some townspeople took hesitant steps forward, encouraged by the courage of Nakamis and the cowboy. Whispers of support floated through the square, forming a chorus of quiet but growing defiance. Nakamis saw an opening and took it. She stepped fully into view, her eyes locked on the trader. "I am not yours," she said firmly, "and I will not be anyone's prize or property. This town may have tolerated injustice before, but today is different. Today, you will not succeed in harming me or anyone else." Her words echoed across the square, and the townspeople, inspired by her bravery, began to stand taller. Their growing presence added weight to her voice, making it clear that the town itself was taking a stand. The trader, seeing the collective resolve building against him, tried one last attempt at intimidation. He leaned forward, gesturing wildly, and shouted, "No one can stop me. I am the law here. This is my store." But his words rang hollow. The cowboy took a deliberate step closer, his calm expression unshaken. "Law does not give you the right to oppress others. Justice is not bought or sold. Your actions will have consequences, and the town will not support cruelty." The townspeople, sensing the finality in the cowboy's tone, began to voice their disapproval openly. "That sign is wrong," one man shouted. "You can't treat people like that," another woman added. Even the children, hearing the voices of adults standing against injustice, looked on with wide eyes, learning a lesson in courage and fairness that would stay with them for years. Nakamis felt a surge of determination. She stepped forward slightly, raising her voice so that everyone could hear. "I will not be silenced. I will not be treated as property. This ends today, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been told they have no choice. We will not allow cruelty to thrive in our town." Her words carried conviction, clarity, and moral authority. The townspeople, energized by her courage, began to form a protective circle around her, signaling that they would support her against the trader's threats. The trader's anger gave way to panic. He looked around, realizing that his power had evaporated in the face of collective courage and moral clarity. He attempted to retreat into his store, but the presence of the cowboy blocked his path. "I will not allow you to escape responsibility," the cowboy said quietly but firmly. "You must answer for your actions." Nakamis stepped forward beside the cowboy, her confidence unwavering. "You cannot hide behind your shop or your sign. The town sees what you have done." Justice is not blind, and your actions are not unnoticed. You will not succeed in harming anyone here." The trader's face twisted with frustration and fear, and he began to realize that the situation was beyond his control. The townspeople, now fully engaged, began to surround the trader in a respectful but firm manner. Their collective presence emphasized that cruelty would no longer be tolerated, and that standing against injustice was a shared responsibility. The trader, seeing that no single threat or act of intimidation could regain control, faltered further. Nakamis took a step closer, her eyes steady on the trader. "You thought you could intimidate people, but you underestimated the strength of courage, intelligence, and fairness. This town will not support oppression, and neither will I. You have no power here except what you choose to give yourself, and today you will not take it." Her voice carried both calm authority and moral clarity. The cowboy nodded slightly at her words, silently affirming her stance. Together, their presence created a force that the trader could not ignore. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his arrogance and cruelty had left him isolated. The townspeople's growing defiance, combined with Nakamis's bravery and the cowboy's authority, had made it impossible for him to continue his scheme. Finally, the trader slumped slightly, his anger giving way to defeat. His sign, once a symbol of arrogance and cruelty, now seemed like a relic of a time when people tolerated injustice. He could no longer argue, intimidate, or manipulate. The town had spoken, and the message was clear. No one had the right to control the life of another human being. Nakamis stood tall, her eyes scanning the crowd. She could see the admiration, relief, and respect in the faces of the townspeople. She knew that today was not just about her own freedom. It was about sending a message that cruelty and oppression would not thrive in their town. The cowboy, standing quietly beside her, acknowledged her bravery with a subtle nod. The townspeople began to disperse slowly, but the energy of the confrontation lingered in the air. People spoke in hushed tones about what had happened, discussing the courage, intelligence, and moral clarity that had defeated the trader's arrogance. Mothers spoke to their children about fairness and standing up for what is right, while men discussed how the town could continue to support justice in the future. Nakamis took a deep breath, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. She had faced danger with intelligence and courage, and she had inspired others to do the same. The trader, now silent and defeated, had no choice but to remove the sign and acknowledge that his actions had been wrong. The town, once hesitant and uncertain, had come together to support justice and fairness. The cowboy, his role in the confrontation complete, turned to Nakamis. "You did well," he said quietly. "Your courage and intelligence made all the difference. You didn't wait for someone else to solve the problem. You acted, and you inspired others to do the right thing." Nakamis nodded, appreciating his words but knowing that her actions had been her own. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, Nakamis reflected on the day's events. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had faced cruelty, injustice, and danger, and she had prevailed through intelligence, careful planning, and moral clarity. The town had witnessed her actions and learned a lesson in fairness, respect, and courage. The trader, now quietly removing the sign and attempting to regain composure, could not escape the lesson he had learned. Greed, arrogance, and cruelty could be challenged, and even in a town that seemed lawless, courage and justice could prevail. Nakamis had become a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and moral authority, and the townspeople had learned that standing together against injustice was both possible and necessary. By the end of the day, the town returned to its routines, but the memory of the confrontation remained vivid in everyone's mind. Nakamis, the cowboy, and the townspeople had demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and moral clarity could triumph over arrogance, greed, and cruelty. The town had changed, not just in its rules, but in its awareness of what was right and what was wrong. The events of the day marked a turning point in the town's history. The traitor had been exposed, his arrogance humbled, and his cruel sign removed. Nakamis had asserted her freedom, stood up for her rights, and inspired others to recognize the importance of justice. The cowboy, having played a key role in guiding the town toward moral clarity, prepared to leave, knowing his task was complete. As evening fell and the town settled under the fading sunlight, the lesson of the day became clear. Cruelty and injustice could not survive when faced with intelligence, courage, and collective moral strength. Nakamis had proven that standing up for what is right was both possible and powerful, and the townspeople would carry that lesson forward in the days and years to come. The town woke the next morning to a sense of calm that was unusual for the frontier streets. The sun rose over the wooden buildings, casting a warm glow on the dusty roads and cattle pens. Birds sang from the trees, and the wind carried the soft scent of grass and hay from the nearby plains. Though the town looked peaceful, the memory of the events from the previous days remained fresh in everyone's mind. People moved more confidently now, their heads held a little higher, and conversations were filled with thoughtful reflections rather than whispers of fear and uncertainty. Nakamis walked through the streets, noticing the subtle changes. She could feel the shift in the town's energy, a sense of collective awareness that had been absent before. The townspeople, who had once been hesitant to challenge the traitor's cruelty, now seemed proud of the way they had stood together for justice. Mothers smiled at their children with a sense of reassurance, while fathers spoke of fairness and courage as important lessons to teach. Even travelers who passed through the town paused to listen, learning of the bravery and intelligence that had confronted the traitor and transformed the town. The general store, once a symbol of greed and arrogance, had changed as well. The traitor had removed the offensive sign, and his demeanor had shifted from smugness to a quiet, reluctant humility. He no longer acted with the same careless arrogance. Instead, he moved cautiously, aware that the town's eyes were watching him, and that his previous behavior could not be repeated without consequence. The experience had left a lasting impression, reminding him that cruelty and greed could never go unchecked. Nakamis reflected on the events with a mixture of relief and pride. She had faced danger and injustice, and through careful planning, intelligence, and courage, she had not only protected herself but had also inspired others to stand against wrongdoing. The experience had taught her that one person, acting with determination and clarity, could influence an entire community. Her confidence had grown, and she felt a deep sense of empowerment that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The townspeople, inspired by the events, began to take small but meaningful actions to ensure fairness and justice in the future. Discussions about the importance of respecting each other's rights became common in the town square. Children learned the lessons of courage and fairness through stories of Nakamis's bravery. The town, once focused solely on survival and practical concerns, now had a stronger sense of morality and community responsibility. People realized that standing together against cruelty not only protected individuals, but also strengthened the entire town. Nakamis continued to walk through the town, acknowledging smiles and nods from people she had never spoken to before. She could sense their gratitude and respect, though she did not seek recognition. Her focus had always been on ensuring that justice was done and that the traitor could not continue to manipulate or harm others. The quiet nods and appreciative glances of the townspeople were a reminder that her actions had mattered, that they had made a difference. The cowboy, who had arrived so unexpectedly and changed the course of events, prepared to leave the town. He had guided the confrontation with calm authority and had supported Nakamis when she asserted her freedom. His presence had been crucial in showing the townspeople that courage and moral clarity could challenge even the most arrogant and cruel individuals. Before departing, he spoke quietly to Nakamis. "Remember this moment," he said. "Your courage and intelligence changed the town. Stand firm in your convictions and never doubt the power of doing what is right." Nakamis nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and understanding. His words reinforced the lessons she had already learned and gave her confidence for the future. As the cowboy rode away, the town slowly returned to its daily rhythm. People resumed their chores, repaired fences, and tended to their livestock, but the atmosphere was different. The sense of empowerment and moral awareness lingered. The town had experienced a moment that reminded everyone of the importance of standing for justice, even when it seemed difficult or dangerous. Nakamis, walking through the streets, could see that the lessons learned would not be forgotten. Over the following weeks, the story of the confrontation spread to nearby towns. Travelers who had witnessed or heard of the events spoke of the bravery of Nakamis, the authority of the cowboy, and the moral awakening of the townspeople. The tale became an example of how intelligence, courage, and community action could challenge cruelty and injustice. It inspired others in nearby settlements to question acts of unfairness and to stand together in support of what was right. Nakamis also reflected privately on the personal lessons she had learned. She realized that courage was not simply the absence of fear, but the ability to act thoughtfully and decisively despite it. She had faced someone who underestimated her and had taken deliberate action to assert her autonomy. Her intelligence, patience, and moral clarity had combined to overcome the threat posed by the traitor. She knew that these qualities would continue to guide her throughout her life, no matter what challenges she faced. The townspeople, too, reflected on the events with a mixture of relief and pride. They had witnessed a powerful example of justice and morality in action. Many felt inspired to take a more active role in maintaining fairness and order in their community. Discussions about rights, respect, and collective responsibility became part of daily life. People recognized that the events surrounding the traitor had not only corrected an immediate wrong, but had also strengthened the ethical foundation of the town itself. Even the children learned important lessons. Mothers and fathers shared stories of Nakamis's bravery and the cowboy's guidance, emphasizing the importance of standing up for oneself and others. They learned that courage, intelligence, and morality could influence more than just immediate outcomes. They could shape the values and character of an entire community. The story became part of the town's culture, a reference point for teaching fairness and respect to future generations. Nakamis herself began to think about her own future. She realized that her actions had given her a new perspective on what she could achieve through courage, intelligence, and careful planning. She understood that her life was her own to shape, and that she had the power to make a positive impact, not only for herself but for others who might face injustice. The events of the past days had given her confidence, resilience, and a sense of purpose that would stay with her forever. The trader, humbled and subdued, eventually returned to his business with a quieter demeanor. He no longer acted with the same arrogance and carelessness. Though he remained in town, his influence was diminished. The townspeople, having witnessed the confrontation, held him accountable for his actions. They understood that power without respect, morality, or justice could not endure. The lesson he learned would remain with him, a reminder that cruelty and greed were never beyond consequence. As the weeks turned into months, the town continued to thrive, guided by the lessons learned from the confrontation. Discussions about fairness and justice became a natural part of community life. People looked out for one another, recognizing that collective responsibility and moral courage were essential for a peaceful and prosperous town. Nakamis's example inspired not only the townspeople, but also travelers who passed through. spreading the story further and reinforcing the values of courage and justice in the region. Nakamis, walking through the streets one evening as the sun set in a golden haze, reflected on how far she had come. She had faced danger, injustice, and cruelty, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. Her courage had inspired a town, guided by the presence of the cowboy and her own determination. The lessons she had learned would guide her throughout life, reminding her that intelligence, careful planning, and moral clarity were powerful tools against oppression and injustice. The town itself, forever changed by the events, continued to remember the day the trader's arrogance was challenged. The story became part of the town's history, retold in homes, schools, and public gatherings as a lesson in courage, fairness, and the power of standing together. Mothers spoke of Nakamis's bravery to their children. Fathers spoke of the importance of moral courage, and travelers who heard the tale carried it to other settlements, spreading the message that cruelty could be confronted and justice could prevail. As the seasons changed, Nakamis's presence in the town became more than just a story. It became a symbol of resilience and empowerment. People began to recognize the importance of standing up for what is right, even when fear and uncertainty threatened to hold them back. The cowboy's brief visit remained a remembered spark of guidance, a reminder that sometimes the right support at the right time could amplify courage and bring about meaningful change. Nakamis herself continued to live her life with dignity and strength. She remained vigilant, aware that injustice could appear in many forms, but confident in her ability to respond with intelligence, courage, and moral clarity. The town had learned valuable lessons about fairness and collective responsibility, and she had proven that even one determined individual could inspire an entire community to act for the greater good. By the end of the year, the town had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. People treated one another with greater respect. The lessons of courage, intelligence, and morality became ingrained in the town's culture. Children learned from examples of bravery, and adults carried the memory of the confrontation as a guiding principle in their daily lives. The story of Nakamis and the cowboy became a symbol of hope, justice, and the power of standing up for what is right. And though the town returned to its normal routines, the memory of those days remained vivid. The trader, humbled and cautious, could no longer manipulate or harm others. The townspeople had learned that courage, intelligence, and collective moral awareness could challenge even the most arrogant individuals. Nakamis had shown that one person, armed with determination and moral clarity, could change the course of events and inspire lasting change. In the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the town settled under the glow of twilight, there was a sense of peace and accomplishment. The story of bravery, courage, and justice had left a lasting imprint. Nakamis had reclaimed her freedom, guided by her intelligence and supported by the quiet authority of the cowboy. The town had witnessed the triumph of fairness over cruelty, and the lessons learned would resonate for generations to come. The dusty streets, once filled with whispers of fear and uncertainty, now held the echoes of courage and moral strength. The town had grown wiser, stronger, and more aware of the importance of justice. And Nakamis, standing tall and proud, had become a living symbol of resilience, intelligence, and the enduring power of standing up for what is right.